Merry Christmas, New York City. After December 27th, 2 days after Christmas Day, if you're unvaccinated, you will be out of work permanently. This morning, New York Mayor Bill de Blasio, the outgoing communist adjacent, I guess you could say. I mean, he's probably not a commie in the same way that he was back in the day, but an old commie who's, tried to take part in, the modern progressive movement. His parting gift to the people of New York City, a city which is unrecognizable when you compare it to what it looked like when he took office from Michael Bloomberg. I'm no Bloomberg fan, but he was kind of like I don't want to be so kind as to compare him to Lee Kuan Yew, but because I do have a lot of respect for Lee Kuan Yew, much more than I do Michael Bloomberg, but he was a very effective police state manager. That's what Bloomberg was. That's what New York City was, like it or hate it. Police states have their advantages and they have their disadvantages. The advantages of a police state are that they're pretty safe and stable, and there are very strict boundaries, but as long as you stay within those boundaries, you can live a happy life. Since Bill de Blasio took over, New York has shifted away from being an orderly police state into being a disorderly police state. There's very strict sanctions, against the government's political enemies. It's not a place where it's easy to do business or anything. It's not, in my opinion, a place that I would ever want to live. But common criminals are given carte blanche to run free and roam free in New York City. It's, by all accounts, by every metric, a much more dangerous place than it was before Bill de Blasio took office. Yet, Bill de Blasio, it's not like he's just some, real lax, libertine guy who doesn't want to be tough on people. So, he's so nice and cuddly and resistant to using force that, he can't bring himself, even with these, with the violent criminals, to be too tough on him. No, he's perfectly happy to be tough on his political enemies, the unvaccinated, on those New Yorkers who have the gall to not do as they're told. Bill de Blasio strongly recommended that all New Yorkers go get their jab. And some of them, quite a few of them, substantial portion of them, particularly the non-white population of New York City, said, no, you know what, I don't think that's what's best for me. I'm going to make the decision that I think is in my best interest, even if it's not necessarily in the best interest of Mayor Bill de Blasio. And as a result, is this soft-on-crime mayor, Bill de Blasio, is he just going to say, oh, well, live and let live, I did my part. I tried to, but I can't force him. I'm not a super tough guy. I don't want to do that. No, his job is, well, then you lose your job. Or, I'm sorry, not his job is. His reaction is, you lose your job if you don't do as I say. You will be unpersoned. You will have no life. Not only can you not eat indoors, you can't work indoors, you can't work outdoors in New York City. They won't even let you work as a garbage man if you're unvaccinated. You've got until this Christmas to find a new job, a new life, in a new city, probably a new state, if you're unvaccinated living in New York City. Think about it. Somebody who has grown up and lived in that city and worked in that city their entire lives, let's say they've never been anywhere else. Which is, most people in America don't really travel outside of, their hometown or their home state. Most people don't travel to other countries. Most people don't move around. Are there a lot of people who do? Yes, but for most Americans, they grow up in their town, in their community. They live their lives. They die, and then their children grow up in those communities too, and they do what they do. But if you're someone in New York City, no matter how many generations you've been there, no matter how many ups and downs for the city your lineage has withstood, if you make the choice to not get this vaccine, which I don't know why we're still calling it a vaccine, considering that the efficacy has dropped tremendously as the virus has mutated, which is what you would expect with a virus that evolves this quickly. But anyway, that's beside the point. If you don't get the vaccine, your life and your history in New York City is over. You can't live there unless you're independently wealthy and you don't have to work. You know, if you're retired, I guess you could still live in New York City, but people usually don't retire in New York City. They retire outside of New York City, somewhere where it's cheaper to live. You can't really live on a retirement income in the city of New York. So yeah, the uber wealthy, if they don't want to get vaccinated, they can stay there. But everybody else, people who just, you know, the guy who works down at the corner store, or as they call it, I believe, the bodega, the garbage man, the mailman, although those were government employees, so they would have lost their job already. The bank teller, the waiter, the bartender. Hell, I would presume even people who own their own store. I mean, you're an employer, and you pay yourself a salary, so you probably would have to mandate a vaccine for yourself as well. I mean, I would think. I don't know. I guess, well, we don't know yet since Bill de Blasio just announced this on MSNBC. We don't have the details yet. Maybe there will be an exemption if you're self-employed, but I wouldn't think so. Then the next question becomes, will these people be able to file for unemployment compensation? You know, if you live in New York City and you lose your job because you're not vaccinated, is the government going to say, well, that's not a valid excuse. You lost your job for your own reasons, so you're not going to get unemployment now. What happens to these people? Because this is not just government employees. It's not as simple as, oh, one employer said they don't want to hire vaccinated people, and so now you have to go find another job at a time when there's an extreme, labor scarcity in the country. At a time in which, it's probably, relative to other points in history, it's probably pretty easy to find a job right now if you needed to switch. But if every employer in the entire city of New York, which is a massive place, has closed their doors to you, it's not just like, oh, I can get a job one town over. No, you don't live in New York City and work outside of New York City. If anything, you live outside New York City and work in New York City. And so this is about as extreme of a measure as I can think of at this point. Because the people who have gotten to this point still not taking the vaccine, they're pretty dead set on not taking it. They've had a lot of pressure put on them. They've heard the arguments, and they said, you know what, that's not for me. And so I think, rather than take the jab, most of the people remaining in New York who have not taken it probably will just leave. That is if they can. Some people who are real poor and really can't get out and who need to, feed their family, they, might begrudgingly take it. But they're going to be very bitter about that. And it's sick that old Warren Wilhelm is putting people in this position. The reason why I hesitated to call him a commie at the beginning is that, commies, the one thing you're supposed to be good for is caring about, the common man. The idealistic communist believes that, they have working people's best interests at heart, and that they're standing up to the capitalist class. That's, I think that's nonsense. But that's what good communists and people who have, good intentions, that's what they believe. That's what attracts people to that sick ideology. But this guy clearly doesn't believe that. He's using, the so-called capitalist class in order to impose his will, in order to oppress the working class. This is about the most, idealistic communist thing you could do. You're denying people their livelihood for committing wrongthing. Now, of course, in reality, this is what communists did all the time. This is what communists did throughout history. But American communists never acknowledged that. Every time you bring that up, they would go, "Oh, well, that's not real communism," or, "Well, that's just Stalin was a dictator. That's how we excuse his stuff and don't associate that with communism." That's the kind of guy who Bill de Blasio used to be. He was an American communist. American communists were bleeding hearts who never acknowledged the atrocities of the Soviets or the other Eastern Bloc countries or China or North Korea. But here he is doing the, prosecuting a purge, if that's the right term, purging his political enemies, and much in the same way that Stalin did. When Stalin came to power, you had the Stalinist purges. All the people who were not, correctly aligned with Stalin, they all lost their jobs. They were exiled. They were killed. They were sent to the gulags. There was all various levels of punishment for all the people who got purged. But they were out. They were out of the system. They were flushed out, and that's what Bill de Blasio is doing right now. This is a Stalinist purge in America. And so we shouldn't expect it to end here. Once New York City implements this, and gosh, I mean, it's going to be a disaster. But once they do it, then that'll give the green light to other cities, at the very least. And the unvaccinated, and it's not just going to be, once this precedent is set sort of that you can ban your political enemies from employment, we're going to see it for other reasons, too. Oh, if you own a gun, you're not allowed to be employed anymore. Stuff like that. Again, might seem far-fetched at the moment, but things are moving very, very quickly right now. I mean, just a couple months ago, the idea that the city of New York would banish all unvaccinated people would have been Loony Tunes. It's Loony Tunes today, but it's reality. We're living in a Loony Tunes world. And so the next city, after New York City, to implement this, because I think the people will wait for New York to take the heat for this. And of course, it's the outgoing mayor who's doing it, not the incoming mayor. And the incoming mayor is going to say, well, that was the policy of the last guy. I mean, I'm not just going to undo it. It's already done. This controversy is coming as Bill de Blasio is on his way out. And so the idea is, well, the bad, news cycle will be over by the time the next guy, Eric Adams, I think his name is, comes in. And then he's just going to ignore it and pretend like it's not there, even though we all know it's there. And by then, everybody who didn't want to get the jab either will have taken it or will have left the city. And so then you can expect LA and Chicago to do the same thing, and on down the line. And so this is probably, I would guess, a reaction to Biden's vaccine mandate kind of getting struck down in court, Biden's waning approval ratings, local Democrats realizing, gee, Biden doesn't have the political capital to really do this at the federal level and just to say everybody has to get vaccinated now. He can't even implement it against the companies with 100 employees and more, and that's an arbitrary, number, 100 employees or more. The only reason why they did that is because they didn't think that they had the leverage to impose this on all companies. But New York City, they're doing that. They're saying it doesn't matter how many employees you have, all companies, everybody, if you have a job and you don't have a jab, you have to pick one. You either go jabless and jobless, or jabbed with a job. And so it'll be easier to implement this piecemeal across the country in different jurisdictions entirely than it will be to implement it at the federal level. And of course, all of this is done by executive fiat. They're not passing any laws. Everywhere in this country really is, at every level of government, it's an elective dictatorship. We don't really have a legislative process these days. It's just, at whatever level of government you're talking about, whether it's the city, the state, or federally, whoever the executive is calls all the shots. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.